Berlin is a city of memorials. Many of the memorials are constructed like mid-century minimalist sculptures. I encounter a large object in front of me, often a single industrial material, and as I walk around it, I become aware of myself in relation to it. This is the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. It is about 2 minutes from the Brandenburg Gate. The memorial is not a statue of shining steel and gold, but concrete and shadow. These are not shadows of negative space, but shadows as presence, as material, physical extensions of the structure that you walk through. And as I walk through it, I sink into the ground as it dips towards the middle. The concrete blocks rise above me until I'm lost in a labyrinth, a maze without a clear entrance or exit. In the zone of interest, Rudolf Höss walks beneath his house, as if it is a labyrinth of concrete and shadow. The headquarters he works in, with its spiraling staircases and floors covered in dark, rectangular patterns. He walks in circles downward into shadow. The architecture acts itself as a formal agent, holding an experience in its shape. These are the works of the artist Richard Serra. He was a sculptor who worked primarily with steel. These giant minimalist sculptures, some of the panels of these steel structures weigh as much as 12 tons each. It forces you to walk through them and engage with them in a way that, sadly, the video or a photo cannot capture. You have to actually walk around it. His early inspiration was dancers, and he used a list of verbs that he created back in the 60s to structure his sculptures from. This idea of to wrap, to cover, to scatter, to curve. So this idea of capturing verbs in a physical shape. For him, to draw was a verb, to sculpt. This idea of becomings, one thing becoming another through action. This is another large sculpture artist named Michael Heitzer. This is a piece called City. This is about, I believe, 1.5 miles wide. It took 50 years to build, cost somewhere in $40 million, I believe. They only allow 6 people there a day. He worked from an idea of reverses, which are these kind of solid states of matter, visible to invisible, noise to silence, and tried to create structures that would get you from one to the other. I'm going to take just 2 of them, he had others, and engage this idea of verbs and becoming one to the other. Returning to the idea of memorials, we'll add forgetting to the list. Forgetting and occultation, a hiding resulting from the removal of stimuli. But instead of saying that remembering is the opposite of forgetting, we'll say present tense. So now you have these oppositions: invisible to visible, silence to noise, forgotten to present tense. How can sculpture or a piece in front of you get you to progress from one to the other? It's a matter of perspective. This is based on Merleau-Ponty's idea of the phenomenology of the self, which has your body as the visceral reactions to sensory phenomena. I'll demonstrate now noise becoming silence. Cut the background sound that was playing, which may for you have become a feeling of silence. Now you can pay attention to the sound around you as you're sitting or standing or walking. The other sounds, you become present tense, aware of the perception to stimuli around you. This is work from an artist named Robert Irwin, who named light as his primary material. In order for us to see something, it must happen in light. Yet, we hardly ever notice light itself.
You had 10 or 15, 20 seconds of both getting used to what's happening in the room, figuring out what's happening, and being dazzled by the way you yourself were figuring that was happening inside of you. To perceive yourself perceiving, that was the trick. To kind of jumpstart yourself into an awareness of how simply miraculous seeing is.
Now, if you can notice light as invisible, how about noticing silence as noise? Here, at the beginning of the film, The Zone of Interest, the family is outside in nature, and you might be out here and say, what beautiful silence. Back at home for them, they live right next door to Auschwitz. They actually share a wall with Auschwitz. Their garden wall is the camp wall. You can see the barbed wire in the upper left-hand corner. You hear this constant rumbling, the sound that they seem to treat as silence. These could be Google executives. Here's one sequence from the film, plays the sound that they considered silence. This is the Holocaust Tower, another memorial in Berlin. It's part of the Jewish Museum in the center of the city. You can see that it is a 24-meter-tall concrete void, is how it's usually described, with a single slot at the top where light and sound come in. The space itself creates this incredible reverb, which blends all the sounds from the outside into one long drone. This is architecture recreating a subjective experience, a perspective, as a space that you can walk into yourself. Here's a clip where I demonstrate you by snapping. It's about 5.5 seconds. Timed it while in the space. Remind me of the sound in The Zone of Interest, where everything from the outside become this long drone, all drawn out. Here, the Commandant Hess was standing outside at night, smoking. But above all of this noise from the camp, he noticed one thing. Now, I'm not sure if you could identify that, but it was the sound of water dripping. He could hear that from all the way across his garden. Here are his boys in their bunk bed at the top of the house. The youngest of them is mimicking the sound of the furnaces at Auschwitz. He can hear them still. The older brother can't. There's an element of what we notice and what we don't notice that is encultured into us. Like noticing a homeless person on the street. Sound gains an ethical dimension.
Text von Josef Wolf, geschrieben 1943 in Oswiecim, Auschwitz III.
This is the only recording of a song with an original melody written in Yiddish to survive from Auschwitz.
Leichten warmen Menschen skufin Kind und Haus.
The recording itself sounds old. It has reduced bandwidth, crackly.
Text von Josef Wolf, geschrieben 1943.
Notice that is the original archival recording, but it has been processed. It sounds like it's someone speaking in the room. I thought it might have been her uncle or something, but it is actually his original voice. The film takes the melody that he sung on the original recording and transcribes it into a piano melody, replacing the voice of a piano, putting you actually in her perspective as the piano player as she's sight reading the lyrics. The lyrics actually appear as subtitles at the bottom of the screen, and they disappear with the trail of each note as it decays. So while sometimes it lines up, most often it doesn't. But also because it's in Yiddish, it's not going to line up for anyone who doesn't speak Yiddish. It has similarities with German, similarities of Russian, similarities of Hebrew, but it's not the same as any of those languages. So unless you are a native Yiddish speaker, there's always going to be a slight rub between what you read in the subtitles and the way they fade with each note and your own understanding of the song. This relates to Roland Barthes' idea of a topos, that in order to engage and open a relation with another, you must mark them as being fundamentally unknowable and separate from you in order to resist the urge to make them a reflection of you, to see yourself in them. Glissant's term for this is the opacity of the other, this distance, this rub that you know they are unknowable to you, and that is how you stay ethical to it, your relation. Here are the lyrics from Joseph Wolf's song. Notice that they have an emphasis on the body and the feeling, sensation, this present tense feeling and looking out towards the future. So that's how a memorial becomes present tense.